So today I'm upgrading a Dell Optiplex 7020 desktop PC that I recently came across. I recently came into my possession. So I want to turn this thing into a light gaming slash workstation PC, and we just have some simple upgrades that you'll totally be able to do after watching this video, or at least give you some ideas of what you could do within the limitations and definitely on a budget. So this thing has an Intel Core i5 4th gen, I believe an i5 4590. We'll verify later in BIOS. So that's going to be pretty good to handle a lot of different games, as well as multitasking with a variety of different purposes. So the graphics card, I guess we'll start with that. The graphics card that we're going to install today is a Zotac GTX 650 Ti 2GB card. And one thing about this PC, which I'll point out later on, is that the power supply is only rated for 290 watt output. So that means you are limited to what you can use. I would really love to install this GTX 760 because I think that would be a really good pairing with this CPU. But unfortunately, as you can see, this takes 2 power plugs. I think the suggested power supply is a 400 watt for this graphics card because it has a 170 watt at least output, I believe. And under stress, who knows what it would do with a 290 watt power supply. Also, we'll see later on, but this power supply in this Dell Optiplex does not have a PCI power plug. So you'll have to pick up what I have here, which is a SATA power to PCI power plug adapter. It doesn't cost much, just a few bucks off Amazon.ca. I'll link to something in the description below, or at least provide an example somewhere in case the listing gets taken down. So that's why we're going with this GTX 650 Ti. So it is what it is. I think we'll still get some pretty good performance out of that. Again, this is a budget build, so no worries. Just going with what we got. And I'm also going to upgrade the RAM to 16 gigabytes of DDR3 1600 megahertz RAM. We have 4 sticks of 4 gigabyte Micron RAM here, all matching. And for the boot drive, we have a SanDisk X110 solid state drive. And I thought I'd pair that with a SanDisk X400 256 gigabyte solid state drive. So we'll be able to load up games on that. And the dual solid state drive setup will provide a nice speedy system. Yeah, we got a SATA power, or not a power cable, we have a SATA cable here, and we'll need one more. I think that's all you need to complete this job. We might need some zip ties to hold the SSDs in place if we can't find a place to screw in. Yeah. So let's get this started. We'll take the cover off and maybe start with some general maintenance. I've already blown all the dust out of this thing, so we don't have to do that, but I probably want to take a look at the fans as well as maybe cleaning off the CPU and repasting it. All right, let's get started. All right, so what we have here is pretty much standard fare for many Dell Optiplex. A lot of proprietary parts. That's another reason why I'm not taking this motherboard out and replacing the power supply and putting it, say, like in a different case, like I've done with a lot of ThinkCenters, because there's proprietary fan headers. So we're stuck with this size fan. I'm not too worried about it. The CPU fan and the exhaust fan, I booted this thing on, at least got into BIOS before starting this video, and they're nice and quiet fans. I think they'll provide enough cooling. especially for something light like this. And we have an optical drive up here, another SATA connection for our probably 256 gig solid state drive, and two more SATA power connections here that will install the 128 gigabyte solid state drive and the PCIe power plug adapter. All right, and there's hard drive caddies down here that might utilize, but we'll see what kind of space we're working with. All right, so I think well, again, if you're curious, before you venture into doing something like this yourself, just make sure that you verify what kind of power supply you're working with. Like this 290 watt is pretty limited. We'll be totally fine with this GTX 650 Ti, but anything more, I think you'll run into some troubles. Or, well, we won't even really be able to use it unless maybe you use two of these power adapters and sacrifice one of these SATA power connections. I do have a SATA Y power splitter so that we could use two of these PCI plugs, but I honestly don't think it's really worth it. This power supply probably won't be able to handle a better graphics card. No problem. So enough talk. Let's get this heatsink off and service this CPU. We'll unplug this fan header, and I'll show you the example of the proprietary fan header that you're dealing with. So here it is. It's a little bit skinnier, less usual than the typical 3 to 4 pin fan, male or female end that you find on other fans. So luckily the CPU fan is actually very clean. This might be because I already went over it with some Q-tips and I totally forgot. Or this PC might have been blown out regularly and cleaned and serviced by somebody. Because I'm not seeing any dust on the heatsink. So just blowing it out with my air compressor, I guess, did the trick. Also, the thermal paste is dried up, but it's not that bad. It seems like this thing might have been serviced at some point, which is really good. It might explain why it boots up and runs so well with the BIOS check. So let's get this CPU out and clean it up with some isopropyl alcohol and microfiber cloth. Now that this is all cleaned up, we'll place this back in the CPU tray. When you're taking this out, just make sure you pay attention to where the little arrow is, and match it up to something on either the tray itself or printed onto the motherboard. You can see there's an arrow on the tray here, and there's also an arrow on the motherboard. Do make sure that you point it in that direction when you're installing, because otherwise you may bend these CPU pins in the socket. So just a word of caution. That would totally curb your entire upgrade, and you'd have to replace the motherboard or do some detail repair. Always precarious, I've been there, that's for sure. So let's get some new thermal paste on this thing. So I've got some Thermaltake TG-7 thermal grease. I don't have a thermal paste of choice specifically. I just go buy this brand or Corsair brand from my local Best Buy. because local computer shops don't seem to carry thermal paste, and it only costs $10. I'm not saving any money ordering online either. So I usually put a nice little X. Oh, it's kind of messy. Let's reinstall the CPU fan and heat. Oh, before we do that, I forgot to take off the old thermal paste here. So let's get another tissue. All right, that's looking pretty good to me. Again, I'm totally shocked that all it took was just a little air compressor blowout of dust. I definitely did not have to do a deep clean of this PC, which is really nice. Sometimes when I get stuff from offices, it's just been collecting dust for years. But again, I think this thing might have been serviced under contract, which is pretty cool. So this fan is all good to go. And the exhaust fan is actually very clean as well. I don't have to take that out. I'm just going to take a Q-tip, a few Q-tips, and just wipe the extra dust off the fan blades because there is a little bit. Not too bad, which is nice because, of course, this is held in by little rubbers. And I'd have to replace those screws, which is no big deal, but I'm thankful that I don't have to do that service now because, yeah, I'm lazy. All right, so I got my Q-tips, and you don't have to use the isopropyl alcohol for this, unless it's more of a deep clean. I usually just use water. So I've got this little spray bottle here, and just as long as you're not spraying all the components without giving it ample time to dry off, you'll be okay. Let's give it a little spray. And let's clean off those blades. Okay, this fan's nice and clean now. So how about let's install the RAM. So in this case, I'm just going to put all 4 sticks in at once. If you're running into problems with dead RAM sticks or you're getting diagnostic errors, beep codes, it does help to install these sticks one by one, and I believe with this model you want to stick to the white colored DIMM slot 1 and 2. You can start with 1 here, go to 2, boot into BIOS, save the settings, rinse and repeat. Just because I have booted this up with all of these RAM sticks already, I know that it already works, so I'm just gonna go ahead and install them, and yeah. If we run into any errors, of course, we'll troubleshoot, but hopefully not. There are 16 gigs of DDR3 1600 megahertz RAM. Now let's go for the solid state drive. I think we'll install the 120 gigabyte X110 right up here. And, well, actually, let's just check this SATA adapter, because if we can maybe plug it in here. So what you do is you take this male end and connect it to the female end. It's easy as that. Let's try plugging that in and see if it actually connects to the graphics card, and maybe we can utilize the hard drive caddies down here. So let's install the graphics card and see if the plug can reach that far. So we have to remove 2 brackets right here, and to do that you just press this little blue button down, or do you pull it up? You press it down, and that releases the brackets. We'll take this one out and this one, and we'll hold on to these because often, very often in other budget builds, I do need brackets, especially if I'm dealing with older case fans. So I've already cleaned and serviced this GPU. I've cleaned it, blown all the dust out, and put new thermal paste onto the GPU. And this was previously used in a workstation of mine, paired up with a i7-920, I believe, on an old Asus P6T WS workstation motherboard. Okay, all you have to do is line it up with that blue PCIe x16 slot on the motherboard, make sure it's in correctly, and there we go. No screws necessary. Now, let's see if we can stretch this plug. So just about reaches. I think if we take the wires out of this little holder here, might be able to reach. Oh, we're so close. Okay. 1 second. I think there's a way I can make this work. Alright, so in order to stretch this cable over to the graphics card, what I'm going to do is move the optical drive from the top portion of the bay to the bottom, and I think that'll give us the extra inch that we need just to attach that cable. And I'm totally fine with spreading a cable over the face of the motherboard because you're not going to see inside anyway. Yeah, so I think, yeah. I'm going to move the camera up here so we get a better view. So we just need our Phillips head screwdriver, and it looks like we just need to take out these 2 screws. I don't know if we need to do this, but we can lift out these 4 tabs here and pull off the front panel. Characteristic of many Dell Optiplexes I've worked on are spare screws. I think that's pretty cool. Despite all the proprietary stuff I don't like, I do like little things like that make servicing a little bit more accessible for the IT or average user. So looks like we can just pull this right out. Just have to disconnect the SATA connections, and we'll move it right to that spot. Awesome. So just a quick test. I'm going to plug back in the SATA power connection. And can it reach? We were able to make a connection. It's pretty taut, but it's not really pulling on the graphics card. I think we're going to be okay. You know, if anything, maybe it'll hold things together. I don't know. Let's get these screws back in the optical drive. Okay, so now the front panel, we will have to move this up here, and it looks like we just need to depress this tab a little bit, lift up, and place this one over here. There's 2 little slots to fit in. Actually a nice little design, easy. Alright, props to Dell for making that a really easy experience. Okay, just like that, we now have the optical drive installed right here, and we are able to use the hard drive caddies for the SSDs. Exciting stuff, I know. Alright, so unfortunately this did not come with any hard drive caddies to pull in and out of this assembly, but that's okay. Again, you won't be seeing the inside of this PC unless you take the panel off, so we use some white zip ties. First, we'll plug in these SATA cables. So we have one right down here that will plug into SATA port 3, and we'll make that the boot drive. Okay, and another one will plug into SATA port 1. That will be for the 256 gigabyte solid state drive. So place it right about there. Alright, so I played around with some different configurations. I decided to plug in right here, and I'm going to feed another zip tie this way because there's just a bunch of empty space here without the plastic caddies, and that's okay. So let's feed this one. Cut off this piece of the zip tie. And we'll just kind of push these off to the side for now. I'll probably at least tie them up a little bit here later on. But let's just take some time to boot everything up just to make sure that it's recognized in BIOS. So let's connect the cables. Okay, as we can see here, success, we have visual output. And I would have to assume, of course, this verifies that the graphics card is working. The fan's spinning, no problem there. The PCI plug is snug. Let's go to system information. There's our 16 gigabytes of RAM, 1600 megahertz, each DIMM slot occupied. And yeah, there we go. There's the two SanDisk solid state drives and the optical drive recognized. And yeah, it actually says NVIDIA HD graphics as the video controller. So that's excellent. Let's go into boot sequence. We should have UEFI selected. Yep, that's good. Windows Boot Manager. So if you're curious, after you load up your Windows 10 install on a USB drive, you want to select UEFI in the boot list option here in BIOS, just because it's a little more up to date than the legacy, and that's a little more often used now. So anyways, that's looking good to me. I'm going to exit and I'm going to install Windows 10. So one nice thing about this PC is I see a Windows 8 sticker on the back of the motherboard I/O shield. So that must indicate that there is a Windows key integrated into the system and I don't have to go purchase one for install. That'd be excellent. So we'll verify this in a second. Alright, so we'll plug the Windows 10 USB into one of the 3.0 slots here on the motherboard, and on a Dell Optiplex or most Dell computers you want to hit F12 on the keyboard for boot options. F2 is to get into BIOS. And then there you'll get the boot menu, and just in case you don't know, you'll be given a list of legacy boot or UEFI boot. It looks like I might have Windows already installed on this solid state drive, but either way, here we want to select the UEFI generic flash disk option. Don't be alarmed if your screen bugs out like this. That's okay, just wait it out. Windows is loading. Alright, so here's our Windows install screen. Good news. So we'll select install now, and we'll be greeted, if we're greeted with the product key, entering your product key dialog box, then we know that I have to purchase a key. And if not, then we know that, oh, there we go. So there we go, that's awesome. We can accept the license terms. Custom install, and you can see here that we have all these partitions taken up. One way to remedy that is to enter disk partition by going to the keyboard, holding down Shift, hitting F10. That'll pull up command prompt, and there you can enter DISKPART, all one word. That'll get you into disk partition, and here we want to type list space disk, and here we have our two 56 gig solid state drive and 128 gig solid state drive, and disk 2 there is the USB drive. So I'm not going to do this because I already installed Windows onto the boot drive, so I'll just demonstrate that you want to type select. Actually, we'll wipe the so I do this to clean off all the partitions on hard drives and solid state drives for a fresh Windows install. And to demonstrate, we'll do this on the 256 gigabyte solid state drive because we do need to do it eventually anyway. So we select disk 0, hit enter, and simply type clean, hit enter again. And if you're greeted with Diskpart succeeded in cleaning the disk, you're good to go. You can type exit, and then exit again. And then in this case, you can select which drive to install Windows on and hit next after refreshing. So, yeah, we're gonna boot into Windows. I'll load up my SSD with Steam on it, and we'll get to testing out some games and see what the performance is with this CPU GPU combo, and see what our thermals are like and also what the limitations are like. Okay, now that we have all the upgrades installed, let's put the cover back on and consider this complete. The very last thing I'll do is maybe take a heat gun and take off these two stickers and wipe this down a little bit and maybe give some final thoughts as well as a final look at the build. This is a refurbished and upgraded Dell Optiplex 7020 desktop PC. And as you can see here on the front I/O, we have 2x USB 3.0, 2x USB 2.0, microphone and headphone input, a CD DVD RW optical drive, and the power button, and the characteristic look and texture of a Dell Optiplex. Not too much else to it. Let's take a look at the inside and talk about the hardware a bit. That's the stock 290 watt power supply, and with that we're just barely able to power the Intel i5 4590 CPU at 3.3 gigahertz. There's 16 gigabytes of Micron RAM. That's the Zotac GeForce GTX 650ti 2GB graphics card. And we have a 128GB SanDisk X110 Windows 10 boot drive and a 256GB SanDisk solid state drive for games and storage. Now here on the rear I/O of the motherboard, there's older style mouse and keyboard PS2 ports, RJ45 Ethernet port, 2x USB 2.0, 2 display ports, 4x USB 3.0. Sorry, that's 2x 3.0 and 4x USB 2.0. There's a VGA port, serial port, audio in and out, 2x DVI and 2x HDMI on the graphics card. Now onto the games. So, Dead by Daylight on lower settings averages roughly between, I would say, 42 to maybe 55 frames per second, depending on what's, dropping down to 39, depending on what's going on screen. And honestly, that's still playable. Still have a pretty good time playing that game. And here's Skater XL with a mixture of low and medium graphics settings, and averaging anywhere between 35 to 55 frames per second, maybe a little bit more, maybe a touch less. And honestly, with this game, as you can see, it's still pretty smooth performance. You can have a good time playing this game. I didn't experience any major stuttering at all. It was actually fairly smooth regardless of the frames per second count. And honestly, with this game and Dead by Daylight, you don't really have to worry about high frames per second. Now, this is Left 4 Dead 2, a slightly older game, but also a lot of fun and pretty nice to look at. As you can see, we are averaging anywhere from mid-80s to over 100, 110 frames per second, and these are all on unadjusted high graphics settings. So you get some good performance out of a classic game. And on to CSGO, Counter-Strike. So I just ran the benchmark here and played a couple matches myself, and there's no problem playing this game at all. We're averaging anywhere from 80 to over 100 frames per second, only dipping down to quite low once we get into this dense fog, but otherwise great looking game on the system. So this is the Tomb Raider 2012 benchmark, and I turned VSync off for this one, and I ran it both with VSync and on and VSync off, and I found that it looked pretty good. No screen tearing. This game would look pretty nice on the system, and even with the benchmark, it didn't come close to overheating. So now on to the Unigine Heaven benchmark, and what I did was I ran it first on high graphics settings, and we found an average of 30 frames per second, highs of 67 and lows of 7.2. Now onto the low graphics settings, an average of 71.5, high of 122 and low of 27. And the Valley benchmark, same thing, on high graphics settings, an average of 38 frames per second, high of 70, low of 17. And on the low settings, average of 54 frames per second, high of 112, low of 23. So though this CPU and GPU is an interesting match, within the limits of this Dell Optiplex power supply, yeah, you can still get some pretty good performance. Unfortunately, everything is Dell proprietary on the motherboard, so swapping to a better power supply, an entire different system, is a little bit more challenging, but you still have a lot of fun with this build. So have a nice day. Hope this helps you out.